If you found the first few episodes of this show boring and decided to call it quits on Andor a few weeks back, I've got some news for you this week. Hi y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here. Episode 6 of Andor was released on Disney Plus today, and I gotta tell you, I feel bad for you guys that jumped ship a few weeks ago. This is one of the best pieces of Star Wars content I've ever seen. For the non-spoiler part of my review, I am rating this episode a 10 out of 10. Yes, a coveted and shocking 10 out of 10 for my channel. This episode has got everything. Yes, we finally get action. This episode is completely anxiety-inducing. The dialogue is tense and full of nuance, and I have to say, the way that it all plays out actually makes the stakes feel way higher than they are. I know that we've all complained that the stakes in this show are fairly low because we already know what's gonna happen to Cassian Andor at the end of his life. But this episode honestly makes you forget all about that because you're too enthralled with what's going on the screen. I will say this episode doesn't bring back that Star Wars vibe that I know a lot of people are missing. But halfway through this show's 12-episode run, I'm starting to think that this just isn't that kind of Star Wars series. This episode, above all, honestly plays out like a tragic war story within the Star Wars universe. I gotta say, I absolutely love this episode for everything it is and for everything it isn't. So that being said, my rating for episode 6 of Andor is 10 out of 10. And that's all I can say without giving too much away, so let's just get into it. From this point on, there will be spoilers for episode 6 of Andor. You've been warned. In this episode, we finally get that heist that they've been preparing for on Aldhani over the past couple of episodes. And if you know Star Wars already, you know that you should have had a bad feeling about this. But honestly, the showrunners left me shocked with how absolutely terribly this mission goes. We kick off this episode on the morning of the heist, listening in on a conversation between Nemik and Cassian. They're talking a little bit more about the dynamics of the rebellion here, and Nemik is acknowledging the need for violence against the Empire, and he and Cassian both agree that the Empire just doesn't play by the rules. I really dig that these observations made by the rebels always leads into a good example of exactly what it is they're talking about, because the next scene is a new character by the name of Commandant J-Hold talking about the Dani people with some officers. They explain that while they're a very proud people, they're actually desperate enough to be pretty cooperative because they've been under the Empire's boot on Aldhani for the past 12 years. To make matters worse, we also find out that the Empire is making this, the Eye, the last time they'll ever get to experience it from their own sacred valley because they're planning on building a facility there. Which just goes to show you, honestly, these guys suck on so many levels. We get a little glimpse of Cinta and Vel on their own getting ready for the infiltration, while the rest of the group prepares and gets into their roles of soldiers. It's here that we get a bit of dialogue between Skeen and Cassian that reveals a little bit more of Terramin's backstory. It turns out he's actually a former stormtrooper. I thought this was kind of a fun Easter egg because it's not the first time we've seen a stormtrooper turn into a hero. Notably, Finn in the sequel trilogy, I know, I'm really trying to forget it exists too, was formerly a stormtrooper by the code FN2187 before he joined the Resistance. He also mentions that Cinta's entire family was slaughtered by stormtroopers, so we can see why everybody sort of joined into this rebellion. That new character I mentioned, Commandant J-Hold, is kind of an a-hole, and he seems to be a metaphor for what all the top brass in the Empire sort of looks like. He is as cruel to his family as he is to all of his subordinates and the people of Aldhani, and his decadence has led to the fact that his own belt won't even close anymore. So the people of Aldhani and the people in this rebellion are all starving and begging for justice, while this guy has had enough space Cinnabon to have outgrown his ceremonial accessories. Go figure. Now in their Imperial soldier disguises, the group starts making their way up to the base behind the Aldhani people that are making their pilgrimage up into the valley. Meanwhile, Cinta and Vel are infiltrating the base via water. This is another pretty cool Easter egg because it's not the first time we've seen the good guys sneak into the bad guys' lair through the water. In fact, we've seen Cal Kestis and Obi-Wan Kenobi infiltrate the Inquisitor's base in the Mustafar system before. Note to self, if I ever build an evil lair, I will make it away from water. Now, every single moment of this plays out super tensely because we know that this is gonna go wrong. There's no way it doesn't, because it's gotta spark the rebellion, and there's just no way that the very first rebel mission that Cassian Andor gets thrown into is just gonna go according to plan. Nothing in Star Wars ever goes according to plan. The question here is when it goes wrong and how wrong it all goes. And this is kind of what leaves you on the edge of your seat. I mean, I was biting my nails here. At one point, the Commandant even stops and really analyzes the group, and you think the jig might be up. But no, they actually go right into the garrison. I also want to point out that anytime Vel communicates with the rest of the group, she uses the call sign Echo. That's another really cool Easter egg because it shows just how far back into the rebellion the Echo call sign has been used. It's a reference to the rebel base on Hoth in The Empire Strikes Back, Echo Base. Now, it's when Vel gives the order that things in this episode kick off in a big way. Our rebel friends immediately lock up the base and hold the Commandant and his family at gunpoint. And Vel literally tells them, you will cooperate and we'll win, or you and your family will die, which definitely doesn't paint this young rebellion in a heroic way. After all, this is just a robbery. It's not like it's a rescue mission. So threatening two supposedly innocent people doesn't really look all that great, but it plays out nasty and I love it. But of course, in true Star Wars fashion, it's here that as things start to go down, things also start to go downhill. While the group is moving the Commandant down into the vault, soldiers on the bridge are realizing that their comms are down. And once they've made it down into the vault and both officers and the Commandant are having to load up the payroll into the freighter, I gotta say, I loved seeing this guy sweating and desperately loading up that freighter with the officers. We don't usually see top brass get their just desserts. It's usually just random grunts and stormtroopers. So watching a guy with all the little buttons and regalia on his chest having to get his hands in the mud just as bad as anybody else was absolutely fantastic. But in the middle of this, one of the officers on the bridge gets a notification that a vault breach indicator is going off. And as the eye begins, officers go down into the vault to check it out. I also want to mention how absolutely fantastic I thought the eye looked. To me, it kind of looked like Aurora Borealis had a baby with a meteor shower and then that baby started doing steroids. It was just really, really cool and super well animated. I thought it was a visual treat. We get just a few minutes of wow looking at the eye before everything turns into an all-out panic. Corporal Kenzie and some officers make it down into the vault, and Commandant J-Hold has some of the best timed heart failure I have ever seen. Had it not been for the fact that he literally clutches his chest and like falls over, they might have gotten away with it. But when that happens, Kenzie is alerted and everybody starts shooting. While the group is desperately trying to hold the officers off, Cassian has to run into the freighter and he's attacked by another officer who then gets shot by Nemik. Score 1 for the anxious people that make dioramas. We can win. Now it's here that the body count starts to be relevant. Terramin is shot while trying to go help out Vel. Our former stormtrooper is the first loss of the group and certainly not the last. The remaining rebels take off, leaving Terramin's corpse behind as a solemn reminder of what it takes to have a rebellion in the first place. Of course, something else had to go wrong, right? So in a cruel twist of fate, one of the trolleys holding the heavy payroll literally slams Nemik into a wall as the freighter takes off, pinning him to the wall. The poor kid is effectively paralyzed, but Vel gets him to hang on long enough to give Cassian directions. And Cassian flies that freighter better than Tom Cruise can drive a stock car in Days of Thunder, because he manages to escape several TIE fighters, resulting in them being blown up, and they actually manage to get away with the entire entire payroll. They've got the cash, but things are looking grim. Taramin is dead, Cinta has been left behind on Aldhani, and Nemik is probably dying. Surprisingly enough, Vel isn't really mourning that though. In fact, she doesn't want to take him to a doctor. She's sure he's gonna die anyway, but Skeen and Cassian insist. And it's here that we get our first alien of the series, and he's actually not a species we've seen before. He looks a little bit like Maz Kanata from the sequel trilogy, but he's got 4 arms, which I guess is pretty helpful for a doctor. And the subtitles say his name is Dr. Quadpaw. Appropriate. While the doctor is working and Cassian and Skeen sit outside together, we get the plot twist I never saw coming and something I never thought that they would do in Star Wars. Remember Skeen's sob story about his dead brother? Turns out that was bullshit. He doesn't even have a brother. The guy is a rebel without a cause, just trying to earn a quick buck. He actually tries to convince him to ditch Vel and Nemik here, and they can each take off with 40 million credits apiece. Cassian is offended enough that he leaves no questions as to who shot first.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang!
And straight up just kills Skeen right where he sits. Seeming both upset, disillusioned, and tired, he runs in to let Vel know what's happened, and it's here that we find out that Nemik has not made it, despite Dr. Quadpaw's best efforts. So, rebel body count. We've got 1 dead former stormtrooper, 1 dead really talented model builder, we've got 1 dead traitor, and 1 person left behind on Aldhani. Cassian demands his cut and gives Vel Luthen's Kyber crystal, telling her to give it back to him. We get some pretty on-the-nose foreshadowing here because Vel insists that Nemik wanted Cassian to have that manifesto that he's been writing, so I'm sure we'll see Cassian wistfully reading it later. We switch to Coruscant, where news seems to be traveling very quickly. We cut to Mon Mothma standing in the middle of the Senate discussing the unfair treatment of the people of Gorman. Now this is a heartbreaking Easter egg. Gorman is the site of a future major massacre on civilians at the hands of the Empire. It's been mentioned several times, most notably in Star Wars Rebels. And in the now retconned extended universe, Grand Moff Tarkin was actually responsible for this massacre. At this point in the timeline, the massacre is yet to happen, but this does foreshadow it. Beyond that though, it foreshadows Mon Mothma's eventual change when it comes to the rebellion. She'll shift from a political approach to a more militant one. As she tries to get the Senate to listen, they seem pretty distracted, and she then receives the notification on her tablet. We cut to our other diplomatic hero, Luthen, who is in the middle of a sale at his gallery on Coruscant. It's then that a customer asks if he's got anything from Aldhani, and he looks confused, and the guy tells him there's just been a huge rebel attack there. Luthen says he's going to the back to check if he's got anything, and it's there that he starts laughing, and he breathes out this sigh that seems equal parts relief and equal parts what did we just do? The episode ends here, and it's hard to know if you should feel disillusioned or hopeful. Yes, the rebellion has kicked off with a bang, no pun intended, but we saw some good people die, and our hero is kind of a D-bag. We're also seeing some really cool parts of painting an accurate picture of rebellion. There are always people who are going to take advantage of this situation and just try to make some money, like Skeen. This adds so much intrigue. This is so much better than any of the glistening plastic picture perfect images of the rebels we've been shown before. This episode is not without the very adult tension that I've enjoyed from the past few episodes, but it definitely moves a lot faster and stays way more on course with a plot that a lot of us have wanted to follow since it was suggested in earlier episodes. It's got action that makes sense, some incredible visuals, and this show honestly feels so much heavier, so much more important, and just so much better than literally anything that came out of Kenobi or the Book of Boba Fett. I stand by my rating of 10 out of 10. This was absolutely amazing, and even though it doesn't feel like the Star Wars we know and love, take a look at what they've done with the Star Wars we know and love. We've got the sequel trilogy, which was garbage, and Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi were not much better. So maybe this is what we need to really get back into Star Wars. That's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on episode 6 of Andor in the comments below.